Butler County Historical Society member and a retired East Butler teacher. Steve will tell us about the lost towns of Butler County. So now please turn off your cell phones and welcome Steve Schmit.
Okay, thank you. Big entrance there. First of all, I want to thank my wife for putting up with me these last 16 months. Yes, I'm right there. When Gina asked me if I could do this program, I thought to myself, I work with teenagers and power tools. I think I can handle it. But I found out that it took a lot of digging, and I have to thank at least 60 people who helped me. And there's many of you in the room. And it just goes on and on. It's a work in progress. It never gets done. It's going to be a long program. I want you to know up front. If you need to get up and go, you're not going to upset me and all, I understand. I did want to bring some things up from the back table. That's why I made that walk. Steve has printed up a couple items. If you get a chance to go and look at them tonight or stop in at the museum, this is a record of post office reports. And not every post office is in here. But for a period of time, the post office had to send a report in when they wanted to be established or to make a change. So when Skull Creek changed to Brno, that's in here. Things like that. It's an interesting book. And the strangest thing is almost all those post offices said they're going to have at least 200 people being served by the post office. It must have been a minimum of some kind. The other thing that we ran across in preparing for this program was this 1876 history of Butler County. And Nebraska State Historical Society got us a copy of it, and you should take a look at it. Without it, I wouldn't have been able to answer a lot of the questions about the earliest towns. And finally, a document we did not bring tonight. It's an 1889 plat book. And I found it interesting. There's a lot of things in it. I used a lot of the history in it. But also, there's a list of the landowners in Butler County. Each landowner's occupation is listed, his current address, the section that he lives on, where he's from, and what year he came into the country. And of the 700 landowners there, 201 were born outside the United States. Only one was born in Nebraska. So the thing I ran across in prepping for this is Butler County, when it was being settled, was not a penal colony. We're not Australia. People came to us because they had hopes of doing better. They wanted to better themselves. We got all kinds of people and all kinds of skills, and they didn't all stay. But it's an interesting group of people. And I want to dedicate this program tonight to those people. It's a colorful group of people. I'm afraid I'm going to leave a lot of things out tonight, but we're going to give it a shot. Turn the power on. Okay, so we cannot talk about the history of Butler County without talking about the Pawnee Indian tribe. Shatiks see Shatiks. That's what they call themselves, men of men. When white men first encountered the tribe, they numbered 60,000. By the time they moved to the reservation in Oklahoma, they were at 2,800. Most of that was through white man's disease. In Butler County, there are 3 archaeological sites. Number 19 is called the Bellwood site. It's near the location of Savannah. Number 7 is the Barcal site, south and west of Linwood. And number 20 is the Linwood site, Alfred Tahachik made famous. So all these archaeological sites were permanent villages. There's a map like this for Nebraska and for Kansas. And this shows the range of the Pawnee almost to South Dakota, halfway down to Kansas. And today, I'm gonna run this thing. Today they're down in 3 counties in Oklahoma. They moved there in 1874 after 3 changes to their treaties. And the story of what happened to the Pawnee is a sad, sad story. Now we'll move on to white settlement in the county. The first people to come into the county weren't staying. They were going through. We were still flyover country, even in those days. And they were headed for the gold fields. 1849, a gold rush. There were 49ers buried in the hills above Bellwood. Those graves were long gone. In the late 1800s, when white people first started settling the county, they had to establish settlements. Why? Because if you can only travel 10 to 12 miles in a day, if you want to go to town and get groceries, it better not be more than 5 or 6 miles away, or you're not going to get back that day. So these locations had to be pretty close, sometimes closer than that. One of the other reasons for having these little towns or burgs was a place to catch your mail. And it wasn't the twice-a-day mail that we used to have in David City. It was maybe once a week, maybe once a month. There are 900 abandoned villages and towns in the state of Nebraska, white settled towns. That's what the 900 is there for. So these places also provided a spot to worship and to socialize with neighbors and to trade for needed items. It wouldn't be a lot. Maybe somebody had something blue and you had something red, something to break up the monotony. Somebody had a hymn book. A lot of these towns never grew beyond a wide spot in the road. The first map we have of Butler County is pretty simple. It's a square, 16 townships, each have 36 sections in it. That map is from 1858. By December 12th, 1859, it changes. And now the border, the northern border of the county, is a high water mark on the south bank of the river. So Colfax County came all the way up to where the water lapped on the south bank of the river. And you'll see some other changes in there. If you get a chance to look at that, there's a copy of it in the back. And it's really neat to see the different types of changes. So how did people get land? Well, there was the Louisiana Purchase. It wasn't really a purchase, but the French government needed money to pay for Napoleon's wars, so they sold the land that they laid claim to for 3 cents an acre. They didn't really sell the land because they never asked the people who lived there if they could sell it. They just sold claim to it. And so the American government took claim to it and spent the next 76 years trying to settle that claim through wars and treaties with the Indians. Eventually, you could buy some of that 3-cent land for $2.50 from the government, quite a markup. Or you could go to one of the railroads because they got the land in return for putting lines through the countryside. About 1/4 of the county was laid out to railroads, and they'll sell to you for $5 an acre. Why would you pay $5 an acre? Well, the railroad will give you transportation to the site. They'll transport your equipment, your livestock, your wagons. They'll give you a place to stay. They'll even give you room and board for your hired hands until you get set up. They'll give you 10 years to pay it off at 6% interest, which, I'm not that sick, that's good or not, but, at the time, $5 an acre, 10 years to pay it off, that was one of the options that was out there. Another option was to go the homestead route. So this is from a BLM site, Bureau of Land Management, and it shows that the first person to get a federal land transfer in the county was a person named Experience Estabrook in 1860. And if you can see the town up there, town 17, range 4 east, that means it's as far north and as far east as you can get in Butler County and still be in the county. And section 11, as near as I can find, it's underwater. Maybe it wasn't at that time. Another Another name you'll see on that same sheet is Stephen Shen, Shen's Ferry fame. And six counties, Section 6 of Bone Creek Township was the location of one of Shen's ferries. If you go in a little bit deeper, you can see that was a cash shell, it was not a homestead. So he paid $2.50. He paid $90 for these 40 acres, I believe, that's right. And Mr. Griffiths, don't check me on that. Okay, so the second meeting of the county board in October 28th, 1868, they did two things. They set up the commissioners' districts and they set up the voting precincts. And they didn't bother to draw a squiggly line at the top of the map, but there was one there. So this is what the original precincts looked like. I'm not going to go through all the iterations that there were, but they are back on a map. I nearly got carpal tunnel coloring it, so please take a look at it. They changed that map 10 times. 3 times because the voters asked them to. Until you get to the map that we have today, which looks like that. And this is actually 1889 map. And in this case, if you don't know these things, this would be township, town 13, town 14, town 15, town 16, town 17, and then range 1 east, 2 east, 3 east, 4 east. And they don't come into hand when you're trying to look these things up, knowing what these legal descriptions mean. I went backwards for just a second to this map. This is the 1876 map. And that came from that book that I showed you earlier. I'm sorry. That came from that book that I showed you earlier. The history, centennial history of Butler County, which was only 8 years old at the time I wrote the centennial history, was written by a man named George Brown, who was a mover and shaker in David City. And he's going to show up a couple more times in this program. Without that book, we wouldn't know where there's several of these towns we wouldn't know anything about. Their location or even the name of the people that was connected to the town. So we can divide these towns up into 5 areas. Those that never existed except on paper. Those that briefly winked into being. Those that were prosperous communities. Those that evolved into other towns. We've heard of 13 of those already. And those that still exist, but they're not really a town, but they're still out there. We'll start with the largest group. How many towns? Somebody asked me, how many towns are we talking about tonight? Well, I found 58 places in Butler County that could have ended up being a town. That's why the program's that long. So we're not going to spend a lot of time looking at this except to tell you that there were 41 post offices recognized by the U.S. government in the county, in Butler County. And of those 41, only one, Loma, was installed later than 1900. They were all in place in the 1800s. And there's a lot of names there that we're not going to see any more of except on here. This is the most record we're going to have for them. Ridgeland, I never found any information about that. There's one post office is there only for a month, from October to September of 1873. Okay, then we have some other place names, and you may not recognize some of these. I'm sure you've heard of Yanka. Waverly's not the same Waverly you're familiar with, though. Schultzville, there's a couple Schultzes here tonight. Centerville you might have heard of. I'm not sure if you've heard of any of these other names. And we're going to try to go through them tonight. Some of them I won't touch on because there's that little known about them. So the people that came into the county and settled the county were in 2 major groups. Ranchers. Ranchers came in 1858, and to 1858 through 1868, they were the dominant group in the county. There were 6 to 8 large ranches, names like Bissell, Thompson, Gardner, Reed, and there were a few smaller ranches, only about 160 acres, a very small ranch. The farmers or the sodbusters came in the mid-1860s, and they did not get along because the ranchers believed in free range, and the farmers believed in pumpkins, and they didn't get along. So, in 1871 or 1872, depending on which history you read, a dense fog hit the county one day in summer, enveloped the county, and the farmers took advantage of that and slaughtered hundreds of wandering beef animals. Cut the meat up, packed it away, rolled the hides up, hid them, and when the fog lifted and the ranchers figured out what was going on, they couldn't get anybody to prosecute. And so they knew that their days were over in the county, and they moved on. So let's talk about the first city recognized in Butler County, Mahala City. I first heard this, my first meeting of a historical society meeting. Greg Fiala said this, and I'd never heard it before. Mahala City is only evident in one place, in the front page of an 1858 newspaper from Brownville, Nebraska, reporting on the doings of the 5th Territorial Legislature. They say, among other things, the legislature has an act to incorporate the town of Mahala City and locate the county seat of Butler County. And that's all we know about Mahala City.
Big aspiration.
So let's move on to Waverly. Not the Waverly you're familiar with. And this had a short time span also, 1857 to 1858. So in 1857, 12 people from Plattsmouth, Nebraska, came to the site where Linwood is today and began setting up a town site. They cut down some trees, they flagged out some lots, and they actually built a house. They stayed through the winter, and things were looking good for a big start in the spring, and gold was discovered on Pikes Peak. 10 out of 12 of the new town owners left for Colorado. The other 2, we don't know what happened to them. All we know is that when Solomon Garfield and James Blair entered the county, they had a brand new house to work with. Now we're going to go up in the hills a little ways south of the Linwood site to Nimberg, or it was later changed to Nimberg. I can pronounce Nimberg, but they changed it to Nimberg for. And I want you to notice, if you can, I'm going to try to steady my hand. Okay, south of Nimberg, the railroad crosses. Boy, that's why I don't weld anymore. The railroad crosses that road there, and in that little corner is where the elevator was. So the elevator was quite a bit south of town, about a half mile south of town. And you can see it's on a railroad that comes across the river from Schuyler. Okay, here is a map of the town. In 1889, they had big plans. And the map is back there if you want to take a closer look at it. All the towns, or all the streets are named after places in Moravia. Budweiser and Pilsen, those kind of ring the bell. You notice there's no elevator in town. The town was founded by 2 men named Pavel and Marshak. They used their land for the town development. And by 1906, this map has changed quite a bit. A lot of the lots are gone. By 1918, hardly any of the lots are there. It topped out at 25 people. It had a blacksmith shop. It had a grocery store, a post office, and I guess a dance hall. Okay, this is the site south of town, looking at the Nimberg elevator, looking southeast. And where those bales are piled, that was the railroad bedway. In 1904, there was a confrontation between the railroad and Mr. Marshak. They didn't think he was bringing enough grain in enough business. So they went up the road a couple miles. I believe they went to Abbey and built an elevator, another elevator. And then in the middle of the night, while Mr. Marshak's sleeping, they tore up his siding. And he had no way to load grain out. Even if he had a longer spout that would have got out to the train cars, they didn't even slow down when they went by. They didn't even blow the whistle. So the Wahoo Democrat said, well, maybe Mr. Marshak will sue and he'll get some satisfaction, but first he's got to get them to blow the whistle first. Off to the left, you can see a house in the trees. I'm not sure if that was connected with the elevator. Another view of the elevator has a scale on the left-hand side, and it was one of those old elevators built, boards laid flat on top of each other, 2 by 2 inch by, and probably real 2-inch lumber. I built a building like that with my dad. When you go up 1.5 inches at a time, you know, you're up 50 feet, you don't even realize it. So it's still standing. Okay, on the hill east of town is a school, a pretty substantial school. And one of my students here tonight said that school is still standing, and maybe we'll hear some more about that when Carm gives her presentation in September. It's much more than a one-room schoolhouse, so. Harry Peterson. Harry Peterson's a character. He was elected king of the hobos 3 times. What's he had to do with Nymburk? Well, he was on the last train that went through Nymburk. He rode that train on through there. It was one of the things he did as king of the hobos. He closed down rail lines. He was from Ashland, Nebraska, actually a fairly progressive farmer who served during World War I. But between World War I and the late 1920s, they discovered limestone on his acreage. If you've ever been to Ashland, there's a place called Iron Horse Housing Development. That was the limestone quarry. He was getting $10,000 a month in the 1930s, which was about $188,000 a month in our day. He didn't have to farm. Now we're going to go back down the track. Another town that started in 1887. I have to mention, when I have an ending date on a town, I really don't know. I mean, it could be when the post office closed. When is a town lost? When is it finished? When the last person moves out of town? Let's go down the track from Nymburk, and we see where the track turns and goes straight north. And you might be able to see it says cemetery and church there. And we've got a hand-drawn map. We're beholden to the daughter of the depot agent and son of a storekeeper for the history that we have on Ed Home. They provided us with this hand-drawn map, and I'm going to just go across it real quickly. Off to the left, see the District 1 school. Up here is Ed Lochner's home. The town was named after Ed. The legend was he was a commercial fisherman, trapper, and if you needed him to do something, you go to his place and say, "Is Ed home?" I don't know why that always gets the biggest laugh. But anyway, that's the origin of the town's name. Grandpa Garman lived in a house by himself. The Dawson Elevator had a hired manager, and he had his own house and a small barn. The Christian church was here, and the cemetery north of it has 610 souls buried, and it's still an active cemetery today. I counted 6 dwellings in the town, counting the depot. We had a 2-story depot. You'll see pictures of that in a second. I don't know what the railroad boxcar was there for, but it was there. And they had the Dawson elevator, Farms elevator, stockyards, a small house, and the Meredith house. And then on the north side was the Garman home and the Howie home. So I counted 6 dwellings. Now we've got some pictures. And this is, again, due to that history that's in the library. You can go and look it up yourself. This is District 1. It's not the original building. That building ended up in a feedlot somewhere because it was a log cabin. But this is the District 1 schoolhouse. It was at the left-hand side of the screen. This is the Christian church. The caption on this said capacity 225. I don't know where they put it. That's what it said. There's a picture of the cemetery. We didn't go in the cemetery. We just took a couple pictures and then went online to get an idea of when the oldest grave was. It was 1870, and there's 610 graves. Now we're looking down the line, past the depot on the right, and the Dawson elevator on the left. And Gina found this really nice picture looking back the other way. Looking back the other way. And the lady who wrote the history said, well, Well, the only way to get upstairs and downstairs was go through the 11 steps outside. Well, I don't see any steps. They haven't been on the south side. I have not seen them in any pictures. So there were times when Dad would be gone, and they had to do things like answer the phone. The only phone in town was at the depot. They'd run down the steps, run to the depot, run in the office. The office was that little, sorry, to me buns. The office was a little perturbed, little area right there. That was the office. That's where the phone was. Okay, now here's a picture of the Dawson elevator and the Farmers elevator. And here's them today. Well, Wagner Feeds took care of them for many years. This is the Meredith home. It was a Snyder home before that. There were so many Snyders that one newspaper editor called it Snyderville. So I had 59 towns. This was the Garman home. They raised 11 children, had a house, a farm, and an orchard, and then the highway place I don't have a picture of. Here's a freight train coming through town in 1914. This is a section gang, and the man second from the left, his name is Ed Hayek. You're going to see him in another picture here. They took care of all the train maintenance between Schuyler and Prague, those 6 guys. That's a long ways. This was Edward Haval. He was the depot agent all the years that there was a depot there. This is Jim Hayek. He's on Velocipede, right, Jim? Thank you. I checked with Jim before the program. This is called a Velocipede. It's man-powered transportation. Jim said you can pick this up and put it on the track yourself. It's got a third wheel that goes over and catches the other track. And here's Mr. Havel again with his wife and his little daughter, who someday will write history about the town. Ellsworth, 1867, very early town. Ellsworth, we just go down the road a little ways. Ellsworth is on the old government road where it crosses Bone Creek. And it had a suburb called East Ellsworth. And all we know about it is that it existed for those 3 years. It was a place, one where you got your mail. It was probably named after an Indian agent named Henry Ellsworth. Here's a town that a lot of people know, Savannah. But did you know it had 3 other names? Gardner's Ranch, Earl, Lulu, and Savannah. So in 1859, David Gardner appears in the area, along with some other ranchers, says, I'm not going north, I'm not going south, I'm not going east, I'm not going west, I'm here to stay. His ranch was the first post office on that road. And one of the men that came with him was a man named William Earl. So if they were in business together, I don't know, but there is an actual Earl post office on that other sheet. Then a man named Samuel Woodward bought the land that actually became the town site. And the reason that, well, among other things, one of the reasons that Savannah became the county seat, you'll like this, Barb, because Samuel Woodward offered the county board every alternate lot in town if they would make Savannah the county seat. Now, how do we know it was named Lulu? Because there's a deed that says so. 1871. Now, this wasn't typed out in 1871, but I have been in the deed book, and there is a handwritten deed with the same information on it. In 1871, these people were selling half a block of Savannah, or Lulu, for $2,000. I think that's $52,000 in today's money. Strangely enough, B.O. Perkins, you might have heard of him, B.O. Perkins Hotel. He bought 2 lots for $45. It's not what you know till you know. Here is a map that Steve discovered in the basement of the courthouse. They're very jealous of that. They won't let it leave the courthouse, but Steve took a picture of it with his camera. And we have this map today. It's also a copy in the back of the room. This is the only map we have of Savannah. And the lot they were trying to buy is right there for $2,000. So they're about 2.5 blocks from the river. And here's the latest tribe to inhabit Savannah, the Anderson tribe. Now we're going to move straight south from Savannah still staying in Savannah Township, to Luxembourg settlement. Between 1869 and 1873, 17 families from Luxembourg, either directly from Luxembourg or by way of Cascade, Iowa, settled in this area. They didn't exactly start a church, and it'll be made plain a little bit later when I talk about another location. But they got wind of a priest being in the area, and they had services, and when that priest came in the area, he didn't just say one service and leave. No, he baptized everybody that had been born in the last 5 years, and he married everybody that should have been married. And he might have said some burial rites, and he signed papers, and he did a lot of good. It made people feel, holy again. So Marion has been there since 1869. This picture is taken before the road was paved, the highway was paved. I would put that at 1963. Somebody? Anybody? I think about 1963. And it shows the campus, shows the church itself, the rectory, the garage, the school. They had grade school for 64 years and high school for 36 years. And the gym. Now, they built, like many of these small churches, they built more than once. They built a small church, and then they built a larger church. And when they moved into the larger church, they used it one time, and that night it burned down. So they moved back into the old church and built a new church right on top of the ashes of the old one. If Dan Hilger was here tonight, he'd tell you there's still ashes under the church. Now, this is the site as it looks like today. You can't see the rectory, but the rectory and the garage are still there. A new parish hall and the church. And I believe they'll be celebrating the 150 years this year. There's some kind of celebration coming up. Now we're moving a little bit west again. I don't know if you detected it or not. We're following some kind of a pattern. I had to figure out how to do this because a lot of these towns start at the same time. How do you jump around from one place to the other to the county? So I decided to go in a serpentine fashion through the county. So I really went past there. So we're going west across the county. So there was a organization in agriculture called the Order of Patrons of Husbandry, or they called it the Grange for short. You might have heard of the Grange. And there were several chapters in Butler County. They had a little store, and they operated a post office out of that. And I'm sure you might remember from Bob Bell's presentation, they talked about that store being located a little bit north of where Jerry McDonald lives today. I think the Bellwood history book says that it was east across the road from where the co-op elevators are. So we have a general idea where it was. After Jesse Bell came to the area and organized the town, the post office moved downtown. I didn't get a chance to ask Bob about this, but I don't believe Jesse Bell had the post office. I believe it was two storekeepers named Hutchinson and Taylor had the first post office, and it was named Bell. Where does the word Platte come from? When the train first came into town, they didn't call it Bell or Bellwood, they called it Platte. So that town has three names. Here's an interesting story here. Now we're moving all the way to the west end of the county. And in 1864, a man named Habel Pepper got out of the Union Army. He went to Lincoln, Nebraska, and married a lady named Ora. Don't know what her last name was. And they moved to a homestead southeast of Columbus across the river in 1865. In 1868, the county organized. He was at that meeting, and he was selected as county clerk. He was 27 years old. So he got really busy. And if you notice where Alexis post office is and where Savannah is, there are days right apart. So if he had to do business in Savannah or anywhere else, he was not going to be taking care of the store at home. On the other hand, for the first year before they had a courthouse, there was no county clerk's office. So the county clerk was at Pepperville post office. And they rotated the county board meetings from one commissioner's home to the other. There were 3 of them. And also they included the county clerk in that rotation. So at times, the seat of government was Pepperville Post Office. Why did it change to Alexis? I'm sorry, I forgot the location. Tony Krafka lives on that corner today, and I talked to him about it. I really love that copse of woods to the south. Looks like some older trees. I can just visualize that being the location of the old post office. There was a wedding there. I can see that, people getting married under the trees. And Tony didn't think so. He thought maybe sooner these trees up here. We don't know where the original government road was. We know that the river road kind of follows it. So the location of Pepperville Post Office was somewhere between this group of trees here in the front and the group of trees in the back. This is Prince Alexei, or Alexis, the 4th son of the Tsar of Russia. He visited the United States in 1871. It was the story of the year. In fact, just anticipating whether he's going to come and not knowing where he was on the ocean, that was in the newspapers. And so if you noticed how close Alexis Post Office was to the Union Pacific Railroad on the other side, about 6 miles away. This would be like having Princess Di. You probably remember her. Princess Di coming down the UP Railroad on the other side of the tracks. Many of you remember Bobby Kennedy's trip on that same set of tracks. It was celebrity. So the man who took over for Bell Pepper was Chauncey Birch. And for some reason he didn't like the name Pepperville. So he changed the name of the post office to Alexis. And that was in 1872. Prince did get his buffalo hunt. That's why he was in Nebraska. He was in Nebraska for 4 days to make a buffalo hunt. I need to back off one back for a second. I didn't want to show that right away. There were 3 newspapers in Columbus at the time: the Columbus Era, the Columbus Journal, and the Columbus Democrat. They were all weekly newspapers. You could buy a weekly newspaper in those days for $1 a year. Maybe $1.50. You got the really good stuff. And there were stories about Pepperville in it. It was a place. It was a location. It had a church. There was a wedding there. There were 2 horse thieves. They had a 4th of July celebration. They had a dugout school. Can you imagine a dugout school in that sand? They'd be constantly bailing water. So it was a real place. However, things get a little ugly sometimes in the paper. And they were not ashamed to use frank language. So here's someone who's complaining. I'm sorry you can't read this. Someone who's complaining about the treatment his family's getting. Someone in the family's been blind. I think it's this person, maybe the son of this person who's writing the letter, been blind. And the family's not getting any help from the neighborhood. And apparently some of the neighbors are saying, oh, yes, you are. You're getting help. And he says about these neighbors, I must tell you about these reliable citizens. They all came from Michigan. Michigan had a vomit 3 years ago and threw all of them in the northwest corner of Butler County. Pepperville is getting so filthy that it must throw up. That's impossible for an honest man to get along here. Well, the United States Post Office were not so excited about changing the name of the post office from Pepperville to Alexis. And this is 1878 notice of mail delivery. And it says that mail for Pepperville, Savannah, and Ashland goes out on Tuesdays and Fridays at 7 o'clock a.m. So Ulysses Grant did not like the Tsar of Russia. That was part of it. Okay, I can't leave Alexis Township without talking about St. Joseph's community. So there was a community of 12 Austrian families. Again, we have an enclave of people all from one area that settled together, that came together. And they were the ones that finagled a priest to come across the river and say Mass. And then John Meisenberg from Luxembourg heard about that, got them to come over there. From that point on, Mass was always at Meisenberg's. In fact, Mass for most of the Catholics in the county was at Meisenberg's. But it started at St. Joe's. They built a church on land donated by Mrs. Weiner, and I got to meet Father Ed Jaworski. They built a parish hall. I did not know this, but next time you go by that hall, check it out. Out of 4 wooden grain bins. See if you can find a seam anywhere. So then they built the present church in 1954. Nick, my cousin Nick probably knows this. And 2007, completely redecorated. There's a cemetery with it, and has 125 graves. The oldest grave is 1882. Here we have an aerial view of it, and a picture of the church as it exists today. A lot of these things be going off the internet, so they're not super all the time, I'm sorry. Okay, so now we're going to move south. So now we're making the turn. We've gone across the county on the north end, and we're going south down to the next row of townships. We're going to go into Summit Township. And the 1876 history does tell us that there was a post office and a store, and it was run by a Paxton or a Cobb. I get those two names confused, who was from Summit, Wisconsin. So he named the post office Summit. All we know is it was in section 26. That's all we know. And I even had a description of its distance and direction from Butler Center. It made no sense at all. So there was also a church in Summit Township, a Christian church. It ran from 1885 to 1915. For 30 years there was a church. And it's in that other box up above. So where that little church is on the road, east of it, Marv Lineker lives. You might remember Marv and Maureen Lineker. And the school, Joan, back there, District 88. We went to school there. The school was not quite where they had it. The school was closer to the center of that road. And I think Tom and Deb Swobin lived right where that school was located. This is a picture of the Christian Church ladies with the pastor in the middle. They shared a pastor with the Christian Church of right in the city. 30 years they had an established church there. Okay, now we're going to go back east. Now we're going across this row of townships across the county. We're in Olive Township, and if you might know where Scott and Mary Burrish live, or the Morvick family where Grubaws used to live, Molly family, there's a curvy road north and east of David City. It goes through the hills. And there's a siding there called Carr's Siding. And later on, the name was changed to Harris Siding. I could not find a landowner by either name. I don't know where the name came from. It was the name of the storekeeper or the name of a railroad man. That's as close as we got to town in Olive Township. Okay, now we're going to go more than a township away. You might be able to see Harris Siding over here yet. Now we're actually going to go all the way across the top of Franklin Township. And there's a little church, looks like it's on the corner. And the box goes into Skull Creek Township. Why? Because Appleton Post Office was in section 6 of Skull Creek. So I don't know if this is true or not, but I can just see it, just imagine it. There's a post office on one side of the road and a little store. And there's a church on the other side of the road. And people come to town and they go to church and they go to the store and they get the mail, and there's a small community. That church was destroyed by wind. So the parish decided to move it farther to the west. They moved the church and the cemetery. That church was damaged by wind as well. I think it moved it off the foundation. Story. They moved it back on the foundation, and it's there today. This is a picture from the internet, and this is a picture of the inside of the church today. That was the third church south of the Platte River, third Catholic church south of the Platte River. Picture of the cemetery. I did not take a picture of the rectory, but something happened in 1922. In 1922, they built a parish hall, and they built a rectory. They built a parish hall for weddings and so on, gatherings. And they built a rectory because the bishop told them they could not have a resident priest without a house. So they built a rectory. I did take a picture of the rectory because I'm not really sure who lives there now. I didn't want to intrude on somebody's privacy. Yanka, you all know where Yankee is, right? Right east of David City, right? No. Yanka is south and east of David City, almost out of Franklin Township. There were 2 elevators there. There wasn't a store, there wasn't a post office, there were several houses. They don't show in this area, but I know that I have a timeline. Part of my work was researching stories in the newspapers, and I have a timeline on Yanka. They had a baseball team as late as 1940, so the towns would get together and have baseball teams. And Yanka played all kinds of other people. And this is the view of the site today. I think Steve took this picture for me. Jim Reisdorf did a story on this years and years ago. It has a slightly different angle in the picture. And I'm pretty sure this area here, this depression, is one of the pits of the elevator. Now we're going to catch up. We're going to cover 4 places at once. Salona, Urban, Hiawatha, Carmel. Remember, I told you that we were not a penal colony. We brought a lot of well-read people into the county. And I could not find the word Salona anywhere, not even the United States. The closest I could find it, it was a town in ancient Persia. So somebody knew something about ancient history. So Carmel is the only post office in this case in Center Township. Then Hiawatha, Salona, and Urban are all in Oak Creek Township. It was hillier, you needed to be closer together. It took longer to go through the hills to travel. I could go to the 1876 history, and I can tell you what section it says those were on. That's the closest I can get. However, with the Urban, we have a little more history. And I do know the Salona Post Office was operated by Thomas Logan. Thomas Logan was James Brown's son-in-law. James Brown was the founder of Urban. Thomas Logan is given credit for founding Brainerd. So we're going to talk about Urban a little bit. So Urban started in 1865. This is an interesting story again. So in 1865, James and Phoebe Brown head up from Ray County, Missouri. Ray County is north and east of Kansas City. They're getting out of Missouri. They were slaveholders, and they're leaving formerly slaveholding states after the Civil War. Bushwhackers are running rampant across the state, and they're killing people right and left, and they're getting out of town. And they're bringing their 11 children with them. Some of them are married already. They get to Oak Creek, they stop to camp, and they get word that there's Indian trouble up in the Dakotas. 5 of the wagons decide to stay right there. It looks a lot like Missouri. We're going to just try it here. The rest of the wagons go on and are never heard from again. So here we have a small timeline about Urban. In 1865, it's settled by 5 people, and it shows what happens in the winter. They have school, first child's born, they get a sod schoolhouse. Here's another interesting sod schoolhouse. They have a really interesting way of naming a building a schoolhouse. So we had one was a sod schoolhouse in the sand. You remember that one? This one says right in the history that it was a ravine that they roofed over. Okay, we get to 1868, some interesting things happen. Willis Richardson hits the county, and you might have heard of him before. He became this county surveyor, had his name on one of the townships. Also, a post office is established. There's Mr. Brown as the postmaster. And what else happened in 1868? The county was organized. This is one of the more interesting stories I ran across. I would have found it, but I'll explain it. So, James Brown goes to the county organization meeting. He's a figure of some renown, and he's got cash. So he is selected as one of the first 3 commissioners. A later history says that he is disqualified. Well, by reading through the county board minutes, I found out the reason he was disqualified is because the governor refused to commission him. Why? Because he's a former slaveholder? Because he's a Republican and the other one's Democrat? We don't know. But the governor refused to commission him. First sermon preached in 1869, first wedding, first death, another store opened up, and today only the cemetery remains. So we have a picture of Brown House. I've never seen it myself. I understand it's still there. Gary and Kathy Samuelson did some work on it, and they said when they got there, it was just a big old house sitting on some limestone blocks. I don't know how they improved the foundation. But remember, they brought 11 children with them, and then they had a 12th one when they got here. The lady had children from the time she was 15 to 45. One lady. She was a trooper. This is a picture of two post routes between Lincoln and North Bend. I included this because Urban's on the one route. And all these places are gone, except Cedar Hill. Cedar Hill is a church out in the country north of Prague. Some of us know where Rescue is. One of my students' dad drank beer at Newton, and that's as close as connection I can make to any of them. Here is a sketch of the Urban Post Office in 1874. It must be in the fall of the year, because you see 3 hogs hanging over to the left and a kettle being boiled to scald them. So the caption said, it was not clear whether the log cabin or the frame building was constructed first. That's what the caption said. Here's a picture from 1924. The caption with this picture said, the old road came down the hill behind the house and around the tree. In 1888 and 1886, they established the Cemetery Association. In 1888, James and Phoebe donated an acre of land to be used for cemetery with the provision that if it ever turned into any other kind of use, it had to go back to the original landowners. And they're there to make sure nobody tries anything. Okay, we're going to go into Schultzville siding. This is south of Brainerd. And the only record I have of this, it comes from Carolyn Dworak, thank you, is an article from 1899 from Butler County Press said, a siding is recently be constructed on the FENMV Railroad south of Brainerd, and we understand a store and post office will soon follow into town named after that happy farmer, some of the language like that. Well, this is a 1906 map. That announcement was made in 1899, and by 1906 there's not even a siding there. So it tried, but we don't even have that much of it. We're lucky they found that much. Alverno Center. Alverno I'd found years and years and years ago, accidentally researching something. And Alverno was a name for the Dutch community by Brainerd. And just in the last couple of days, I found a little bit more about it. I'll try to remember it. I have notes here, but my computer's down and we're not going to take the time to start it up. So, the first mass in Butler County was at Center in 1871 in a sod house, and even at Mr. Dalling's house. Then they had a meeting at the house of Andrew von Lohm, L-O-M, to decide where to situate the new church. And the chairman of the meeting was a man named William Vandenberg. Heard that name before? William Vandenberg. Anyway, they decided where to site the new church. They built a church, again, like many of these communities, they build a small church. It burns down. So they replace it with a brick church. It burns down. I don't know how you burn a church, but they burned the brick down. They replaced it with this church in 1916. Somebody said it looks a lot like the Colon Church, I'm not sure. This is the interior of the church in 1931. And this is the altar at Christmas in 1940. Here we have a picture of the parish hall. It was used in a made-for-TV movie in 1992, Old Pioneers. That's from a Willa Cather book. Butler Center, a name if you're a historical person, you knew it was around. The 1876 map puts it in a location that makes absolutely no sense. And so, by doing some reading, I came up with this location. Two men, I'm going to mess their names up, Russell and Oliver. Two men, Russell and Oliver, started this town. Russell homesteaded 80 acres. He's homesteaded, well, not 80, but he homesteaded the northeast quarter of Section 8, and then he sold part of the land to this Mr. Oliver. And they knew Savannah was not going to last. They knew that the county seat was going to move, and they thought they were going to move it to their location. So they established a town on a little creek where they had some water. And in fact, it was so well respected that in 1872, the county political convention was held there. Now, they were going to have a Democratic convention, but they didn't have enough Democrats. And they didn't have enough Republicans. So they just had a county political convention. And then at the convention, they split into two groups, and they each nominated different slates for county offices. They had one convention. They got along good enough to do that. That was in 1872. So the town started in 1870. In 1872, they were still well respected. They were actually in the last vote. It was between Butler Center and David City as to what was going to be the county seat. David City won the vote. This is the location, as near as I can ferret it out today. I talked to Rita Devish from Wahoo, who owns the site now. She didn't have any idea that that was the case. I said I had a newspaper article, a letter to the editor in 1927 from a lady who lived there, and said it was a few rods south and a few rods west of the Seward corner. Only it didn't use the same highway numbers that we use now. I know the highway numbers have changed. So because I went to the courthouse and I found Mr. Russell and Mr. Oliver's name on that land at that date, I'm going to say that was the location. And if you know a different place, okay. Now, that's the second community in Center Township. Here's the third community: Hennigan, Ollie, Russellville, actually 4. So in 1870, the year that Butler Center is being established, a man named A.B. Royce, who's a grocer, comes to the county, and he takes a ride around the county, and all the way from Ulysses to Savannah, and checks out the tableland, and decides that Savannah is a goner. And he's going to locate a store in the center of the county. He's just sure this is going to be the key. So he decides to put a store in the northeast quarter of Section 6. So Butler Center's here, Ollie's there. Now Hennigan, there's a man named Peter Hennigan who had something to do. He might have been a landowner. I know A.B. Roy's was not, because his name's not on the land title. But the best record we have of it is his story that he sends to the newspaper, again in 1927. Somebody's commenting on an old settler's picnic, and he writes a letter back and corrects them. I think he's living in California. And he says, it's been 50 years ago, but this is the way I remember it. And he tells about how he came to the county, took the ride around the county, he set up a store there. And then he tells why David City won the vote. He said that his store was the polling place for Center Township for the third vote about the David City, or the county seat location. And because a lot of farmers showed up for the vote, so did a lot of farmers' dogs, and a lot of farmers' alcohol. And so they set up some dog fights and got some things going, and he said several of the people did not go home that night. They stayed overnight, slept in his store. Some of them had black eyes. But anyway, the dog fight going on outside, and everybody goes out of the store to watch the dog fight. So the election judge decides to secure the polling box, puts it under his arm, and walks out to watch the dog fight. According to A.B. Royce, that's the reason that the election was disqualified. And strangely enough, Ollie won that election. so it's hard to tell. The election judge's name was George Brown. This is the location where I think it was. Now, one of the histories says, on a hill high above everything else, 2 miles west of Butler Center, and I see cattails. I see no hill. Now, 1873, Larry Dolan brought some maps over to Steve and Gina's place, and Steve was going through and goes, there's another town on there. And here's a town that appears named Russellville. And this is all we know about it. It's one of those towns that only appears in writing. Apparently somebody wanted to make a town out of it. You don't put "ville" at the end of something unless it's going to be some kind of a word. So that's all we know about that town. Millerton, 1887, 1940. This is the town that became the largest one. Probably the one I'm not going to do the most justice to. We have a lot of extra information about these towns that's in a written document. You're welcome to look at it. Again, it starts in 1887. You might guess why. There's a railroad coming through. And this is the Northwestern Railroad. And the location, if you know where Rising City is over here, you know Rising City is on the highway. So it's not too far off the highway, a little bit south of the highway. And we've got an aerial view, current aerial view. So Chris and Amy Sanders live up here. Don Glock lives over here. Tracy and Linda Glock over here. And this is where the town was. And now we have, I believe it's an 1889 map showing the layout of the town and talking about the price of lots. So at one time, land changes hand between 2 generations of Pillars. Now Pillar's going to be a name you're going to hear a couple times here. He's one of the main men in the county, definitely the main man in Millerton. He sells a lot or two, not a large amount of land, to his son for $5,000. I'm willing to believe that a dollar traded hands maybe, and $5,000 went on the book. But I think he was trying to push up the price of land in Millerton. It's not too long after that, and lots in Millerton are selling for $1. But Millerton lasts for a good long time. It lasts from 1887, well, you'll see a timeline here in a second. So 1870, this is a really neat story. William Miller and his uncle Henry Schreckengost come from Illinois. They go through Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, Kansas, take a right turn in Kansas, come up to Nebraska. Hit the tablelands of Butler County and go, this is it. We like this. There's good land, and there's not a lot of people. They go back home and they tell everybody, you know, there's good land, and we can all settle together, and we can make it a really good start for ourselves. It takes them several years to get moved. In 1878, he finally makes it final. Now, excuse me, some really interesting stories that I'm not going to have time for, all of them. But one of the things is Alice Miller, his daughter, talks about some things. Said when her brother moved into the community, there wasn't a house for him yet. So I had to take a drink of water. So he lived with another family. And I don't know how many people were there, but 8 or 9 of them slept upstairs. There was one room that didn't have a chimney, so they just ran the stovepipe for the stove out the window until the wind changed. Then they ran it out the other window until the wind changed. So as soon as his house was framed up, he moved. A lot of neat stories about Millerton. You can see basically these stories about these towns revolve around, is there a store, is there a post office, is there an elevator, those 3 things. And then the other things are just extra accoutrements. How about June 16th, 1899, there's a rumor of a new hardware store. What's really needed is sidewalks in an opera house. The way it's coming. They've got a full service lumber yard in 1901. And the Methodist Church is coming to town. And it's coming fast. They took it down in Octavia because apparently they're not as pious down there. Sorry, Octavia. They're not as pious down there. They broke it down into chunks, and put it on some flat cars and sent it up to Millerton. So in 1908, they moved from telegraph to telephone. They're moving up in the world. And you see a series of changes in the ownerships of the elevators. And the elevators change hands, and the elevators burn down, and they rebuild them, and they keep moving. How about this, Mr. Dillon? You'll like this. 1932, everybody got their ice from Surprise. And that year, it must have been a cold year, 15-inch ice. We see the 50th anniversary of the church, 1933. Someone that probably many of you knew, Orrin Borlaine, was mentioned in one of those articles, got hurt when his team ran away during corn picking. And here's the Opera Hall. In 1934, a new 3-story brick pillar hall opened. 3-story brick building. It had a creamery, a barber shop, a doctor's office, a grocery store, hardware store, post office, all downstairs. I think a filling station on the side. Then upstairs was a big hall that you did roller skating up there. Okay, 1934, mail service ends. Things are starting to go downtown. And here, 1936, 2 years after the brick building was built, the pillar store is being moved to Garrison. Now the bar, another elevator destroyed by fire. 1939, English and German services every other week in Manuel Luton. We'll talk about that separately. The depot closes in 1940, and I know Jim had a question about that, about where all the depots got located. They fought it. Fought it for 2 years. Finally, in 1942, it's official. The railroad is being shut down, and that rail was torn up as quick as it could be torn up and taken to defense plants in the state because the war was going on. 1948, the Millerton elevator moved to Garrison. Who would tell me about that? Just a little bit ago, somebody was telling me about that. Sorry, Wayne Schultz maybe was telling me about that. And 1948 also, I think, that was the same year that Millerton, the Emmanuel Lutheran, bought a house in town for the parson. They had a parsonage. They bought a house in town. 1950, that house burned down. In 1954, sheriff's sale, lots, $1. Now, after the pillar store moved to Garrison, continued service, and we have a picture of their delivery truck. Here's R.E. Pillar himself. He lived well into his 90s. He supported the community of Millerton, supported the community of Foley, supported the county. He became a state senator, a very respectable person. Okay, now I'm going to apologize right now to Reverend Paul Mackey because I had a timeline, excuse me, for the Emmanuel Lutheran, and it's on my computer, which is shut down right now, so I'm going to try to wing it. 1882, they first started having services in houses. In 1883, the congregation is organized. In 1884, a Sunday school begins. In 1885, the actual church is built, I believe. Then in 1903, they made enough money. They built a new church, which is the present church. First church we run across, it didn't take 3 tries. They built the present church, and the old church becomes a school. They celebrated their 50th Jubilee in 1933 and their 100th in 1983. And in 2023, they celebrated their 140th year. Located on about 6 acres, I believe. Okay, a little town named Foley. So, here's one of those townships that just can't have enough towns. We've got Garrison, we've got Millerton, and up on the north end, we've got Foley. When I was researching my great-granddad come into this country years and years ago, I couldn't find him, but I found his brother came into the country. And on the ship's manifest, he gave his name and his age and what he did and everything. And then he said where he's going to go. He had to be picked up by somebody. He was being picked up by Gene Full. My grandpa's name was John Full. So I asked my Uncle Dwayne, I said, is Gene and John the same thing? He said, well, maybe over there it is, yeah. I said, but the weird thing is his address is Foley, Nebraska. And I said, they must have mistaken Grandpa's last name. He said, no, he said, there was a town named Foley. So my grandpa farmed in section 12 of Summit Township, which is north of here. I believe he's about 8 miles away from Foley, and that was his post office address. I don't know why. We're gonna close it over up. And you notice there's one house a little ways south of town and 2 in town. This is important, because when you do the census, you make sure that everybody in town gets counted, and you go outside of that house on the south side of town and count it too. So if you do that, you can get up to 15 people. That's the maximum people they had in town. They had 2 elevators. They had a store. They had a stockyard. And they had a boxcar that doubled as a depot. Here's the site today. I believe Dan and Jan Seepel know something about that. And there's a timeline. Now this is taken from newspaper articles. And sometimes in these newspaper articles, you don't find a big story about Foley. But you might find the Foley News. And in those things you find things like Simon Garbinson tried to jump on the train and got his toes cut off.
Oh, dear.
That happened in Foley. Again, you see store, post office, elevator, store, post office, elevator. These are big things. It says there's going to be a church built in Foley. I don't know if that happened. A high population of 15 in 1905. Now the stores, there's no store in the post office. Oh my gosh, Mr. Pillar's going to bring his son in. He's going to run a store. So we got a store again. Now the store, the contents of the store lost a fire. I'm going to build a new elevator, and the elevator's going to be run by the person who runs the store. Oh, that was in 1910, and now he's going to move his grocery stock to Garrison. So he was way ahead of Mr. Pillar. Farmers Range trying to keep things liquid, so they say they'll actually ship livestock on commission now. Population's dropped 4 people. Mr. Blevins buys the Farmer's Grain and runs it for 9 years. It's destroyed by fire. Why so many fires? Well, grass, a lot of grass, and then dry years, but also you would get sparks from the railroads. And so some of these were from the railroads, from the vehicles going by. Foley News, and I can't tell you if this is Banner Press or Rising City Independent. Foley News is still part of the paper. Later on it becomes part of Pleasant Hill News. And then last people to leave Foley are Mr. and Mrs. Will Armagust. We have a picture of Mr. Pillar's son who ran the store. He died in his 50s. He died much younger than Mr. Pillar did. Meticulously hand-drawn map of Foley, which is missing a house. This is where I think they were located based on walking around the site and a picture that you're going to see here pretty quick. We do have this picture. It's in the post office book. We've had this picture for a long time. This is the Foley post office. Among other people, it's run by Dad and Ma Burke. Dad was a retired UP engineer. Ma was originally from England and very proud of Queen Victoria. They had a dancing dog, a white dancing dog. He's not right there. He's right there. He's not dancing. He's not moving. That guy's not moving. That guy's not moving. That guy's moving. They're all posing. See, these kids are moving. The flag is moving. So these 3 people have to be frozen for the picture because they want to be historical. They want to be famous. Okay, we do have a picture of Foley. And the farmer's grain elevator is quite a bit bigger than the private elevator. I think probably this might be a coal storage area. There's still quite a bit of concrete out there. We discussed that. We don't know for sure what that is. If it might have been a place where they put coal. Some people I don't want to miss. Okay, anybody hear of the Bone Creek Museum of Agrarian Arts? Okay, and who is one of the most important people to that? Dale Nichols. He was attacked as a child of 8 by hogs. It could have ruined a lot of people's lives because there wouldn't be any museum. Hogs can be very vicious. He was saved by his brother Glenn. This is a case of, and very loquacious people writing stories for the newspaper. I don't think I got paid by the word. They're talking about the results of an alcohol vote. And they could have said, David said yes, Shelby no, Bryson City, yes, but what they said was David City will dispense 40 Rod whiskey and Schlitzes and other brands of famous stuff for another year. Shelby decided in favor of an irrigating plan by a small margin. Osceola will have to import its red eye water, and you go on and on and on. One reason that shows up because Foley's at the very bottom. Foley's in doubt. I did not look this up, I'm sorry, but so here's this person advertises many times through the years in the paper, and he says, basically he's offering to breed your mare, and he'll bring his stallion to a certain place and breed your mare and guarantee a colt to standing and sucking for $12.50. I did convert that into $24, I'm sorry, but put it this way, there's a church that costs $400 and that's $17,000 today, so you do the math. Okay, I love this story. You probably can't read it, so I'll read the entire thing. Early in the evening, the services of Mr. Frank Johns were secured to drive a 60-horsepower Mitchell car while some of the young folks enjoyed a ride. The party was composed of Mr. and Mrs. Earl Abel, Miss Lillian McCracken, and Mr. Orrin Curtis. To lend a little dignity to the party, they drove around and persuaded Reverend Cleveland Kleinhauer to accompany them on the ride. The party went west of town near Foley and back again. Went about half a mile west of town, and while the car was going at the rate of 40 miles an hour, Miss McCracken and Mr. Curtis managed to stand up and were married by Reverend Kleinhauer. You're not the only one that was young once. Just through this here is a timetable for the motor car. I wanted to show you that they had connection. They were part of a line that served several cities. And this is from Lincoln to Central City. Town of Heber is not there anymore. Durant. Foley's not there. Yanka's not there. Everything else is there. But it shows it takes about 13 minutes to get from Foley to Rising City. Well, I'm not sure if that's 13 minutes travel time or that involves embarking and disembarking. I don't know. But, and David said he was about 20 minutes away. Many kids rode the train from Foley to David City and went to high school. And at about 20 kids in total. One lady named Bessie Randall rode the train, went to high school in David City, got trained as a nurse at David City High School, served in the Army during World War I, and gave her life during World War I. Orrin Cottonwood POs. So now we're going to go down to the corner of the county. Again, these are two post offices that only exist for a very short time. They're in the post office records. They're also in the 1876 records. The most that I can tell you is the years that they were in existence, about 3 to 4 piece, and the section that they were on. Cottonwood, I can tell you, was 2 to 3 miles west of where Surprise is today. Where? The only town to exist in Plum Creek Township. Did you know Plum Creek Township was named Plum Creek? At first it was named Richardson, and it was a huge township, double the size of every other township. Then they split it, and it was named Spurk. Because there was a family named Spurk in the township. And it was one of the 3 times that the voters in the township got together and appealed to the board for a change in the name. So we're talking about a corner, really, and this community centered on this corner. And we've got a report from Jessica Levitsky. I can't remember the year. She's a student at Aquinas. She was good enough. I called her folks up. Her folks gave me her number. I called the lady up. She's driving home from teaching and going to get groceries. Very trusting people. And she said, yes, this is what's going on, this is what I did, and this is what you can look for. This is the map that went with the article that she wrote for the Banner Press when she was in high school as part of a class assignment, I think. And I don't think the town was that spread out, but we know today the cemetery is right up next to that corner. And then the school's about a mile away. So, the town was a Methodist town. It was, well, there's two stories, and I'm gonna tell the one I believe. It was started by the nephew of someone named Thomas Ware. Thomas Ware was a soldier in the American Revolution, and after the war, he wanted to go to sea. Then he changed his mind. Instead of being a sailor, he decided that he was going to be a Methodist preacher. And he preached for 50 years up and down the eastern seaboard of the United States. Became, I believe, a famous name in Methodist history. So the town was named after him. A church was built for about $1,800. In 1911, the population was about 18 people. And then the railroad went to Dwight rather than through Ware. So Ware sat between Dwight and Brainerd, or Dwight and Ulysses, sat out in the middle of the country. And when the railroad bypassed them, that was the end of it. The church membership slowly dwindled, and part of the reason given was, how do I put this? Peer pressure, put it that way. The Catholics didn't like him. I don't know if that was true or not, but it had to be tough. And the Methodists got the last laugh because the bell from the Methodist church now peals at Dwight, and the windows are in the Loma church. And so, you know, the Methodists got the last laugh on it. Now, there is a cemetery. I believe there's 11 graves in it. And the oldest grave, it's my wife walking through there. She's doing her part. The oldest grave is an 11-month-old little girl buried in 1872 or 3. Okay, Lone Star Post Office. This is the last town on my tour. This was, and I heard a gentleman pointing this out on the map back there. This was east of Dwight, 2 or 3 miles. And I always thought, well, Lone Star became Dwight. No, Lone Star didn't become Dwight. The mail service that used to be served at Lone Star went to Dwight, and that post office closed. And again, all we know there is we know a name and we know a section number. Okay, now this is not a town, but since I kind of ended up on kind of anticlimactic situation there, I want to throw this in. Between Rising City and David City is a place called Fox Hollow. I'm not positive where this is. I can about walk to it, think I know where it's at, but what it's known for is train wrecks. Between 1892 and 1916, there were 7 wrecks there. 1 fatality. One case, it took out 250 feet of track. And I don't know what is so special, if there's a ghost in that hollow or what. I don't know what's so special about it, but that was what made it famous. So 58, 59, depends how you count them. Those were the places in Butler County that could have developed in towns, and only 13 did. Now, why didn't they? Part of it had to do with luck. Part of it had to do with fortitude. And part of it because they simply didn't want to be a town. They were just temporary in the first place. But remember, this community, this Butler County, was settled by people who were doers. And if it didn't work there, they'd move someplace else. But they made things work, and you know, we should be proud of that. Thank you.
You have one slight error. In the Millerton, that was the parsonage for the Methodist Church. It was a teacher from